The
Look at
moment
this
my sister handed
scar!
me the Hermes
Look
scar,
at what you did to
soft
me!
silk in that apologetic shade
I
of
will
beige
not
that
let you do the
screams,
same to
"Please
her!
disappear," and suggested I wrap it around my wrist for the weekend photos. I knew this trip to Denver would crack something open that had been sealed for 3 decades. The scar she wanted hidden ran 3 inches along my right wrist, a pale ridge of tissue that caught light at certain angles. Most people assumed it was from a kitchen accident, or maybe a youthful mistake with a razor blade during darker times. No one in my family had ever asked the real story. I stood in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons Denver, watching the October sun paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of amber and rose. The peaks wore fresh snow like powdered sugar, and the city below pulsed with Friday evening traffic. It was 6:47 in the evening, and somewhere in this building, my sister Amanda was finalizing seating charts with the obsessive precision of a general planning an invasion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I held the scarf up to the fading light, watching the fabric shimmer. Amanda had chosen it herself. Probably spent 20 minutes at Neiman Marcus agonizing over whether champagne or beige would photograph better. The price tag had likely made her wince, but she justified it as an investment in her perfect wedding aesthetic. Her words from this morning still echoed in my mind, delivered with that particular blend of concern and condescension she'd perfected over 54 years. "Catherine, I just think it would be better if you wore something over your wrist. You know how photos capture everything these days, and Uncle Robert's daughter is a professional photographer. We want everything to look cohesive." Cohesive meant unmarred. It meant smooth and perfect and uncomplicated by questions about where a middle-aged woman who supposedly worked clerical jobs for the government might have acquired a scar that looked suspiciously like combat damage. The scar came from Yemen, September 2011. Not from a conference room in Seattle like I told them, and definitely not from any cooking mishap. A rocket-propelled grenade had malfunctioned during an extraction operation, spinning wild and detonating against a concrete barrier 8 feet from where I'd been coordinating communications. The explosion had sent a piece of rebar spinning through the air like a javelin. I'd pushed a 22-year-old Navy corpsman out of its path and caught the fragment across my wrist instead. The medic stitched me up in a Humvee while we bounced toward the extraction point, and I'd briefed the admiral with blood still seeping through the gauze. They gave me the Navy Cross for that day. It sat in a velvet box at the bottom of my suitcase, wrapped in a t-shirt, hidden under 4 days' worth of carefully selected neutral-toned clothing that Amanda had approved via text message before I'd even packed. I walked to the closet and pulled the box from its hiding place. The metal was heavier than people expected. Solid bronze. The eagle and anchor embossed with such detail you could see individual feathers if you looked close enough. 2 silver stars nested beside it, along with 4 bronze stars and a purple heart that matched the scar on my wrist. 35 years of service condensed into metal and ribbon, and not a single person at this wedding knew they existed. I ran my thumb across the Navy Cross, feeling the raised eagle, and then closed the box with a soft click that seemed too loud in the empty suite. The room cost $1,200 a night, but Amanda had graciously allowed me to share it with 2 cousins who were currently out exploring Denver's nightlife. They'd invited me along with the kind of pity-tinged enthusiasm people reserve for elderly relatives and recently divorced women who might need cheering up. I declined, told them I had work to catch up on, which was true, but not in the way they imagined. They thought I meant filing reports or organizing spreadsheets. They didn't know about the encrypted laptop in my shoulder bag, or the satellite phone that never left my person, or the fact that I'd briefed the Secretary of Defense 3 times this month alone. The silence in the suite felt heavy, pressing down like the weight of all the things I'd never said to my family. 35 years of carefully constructed omissions, strategic misdirections, and outright lies by implication. Not because I wanted to deceive them, but because my security clearance demanded it. TS-WAS-SCI, with Special Access Program authorization, meant that my entire adult life existed in a classified bubble that my family could never enter. But over time, something else had happened. The lies had become easier than the truth. The silence had become a shield I carried even when I didn't need to. And my family, loving, limited, perpetually disappointed in my inability to be more like Amanda, had built an entire narrative around my failures that I'd never bothered to correct. I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. 58 years old, 5'6", with short silver hair that I kept regulation short out of habit, even though I'd retired 2 years ago. My face was lean, weathered from too many deployments in harsh climates, with crow's feet that came from squinting at satellite imagery and classified briefings rather than laugh lines from a life well lived. I wore black slacks and a simple gray cashmere sweater, expensive because I could afford it, understated because I'd learned that invisibility was its own kind of armor. My mother would arrive at the suite in 15 minutes to help me get ready for tonight's welcome dinner, which really meant inspecting my outfit for anything that might embarrass her in front of Thomas Blackwell's family. Thomas, who ran a consulting firm that sounded impressive until you realized he basically helped corporations minimize their tax burdens through creative accounting. Thomas, whose father was a 4-star general, and the reason my mother had been vibrating with social anxiety for 6 months. The thought of facing General William Blackwell tonight made my stomach tighten, but not for the reasons my family assumed. They thought I'd be intimidated, tongue-tied, exposed as the mediocre government clerk who'd somehow stumbled into proximity with real power and achievement. The truth was more complicated. 6 months ago, I'd written a classified assessment on Chinese naval movements in the Taiwan Strait. That assessment had landed on General Blackwell's desk when he was still at Pacific Command. He'd implemented 3 of my 5 recommendations, and the resulting shift in U.S. carrier group positioning had quietly diffused a situation that could have escalated into something catastrophic. We'd never met. I was a name in a classified document, and he was a recipient of strategic intelligence that dozens of analysts contributed to. But tomorrow, I'd stand in a cathedral and watch him walk his son down the aisle, and I'd have to pretend I knew nothing about his operational history, his command decisions, or the fact that we'd been part of the same silent war for decades. A knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I shoved the metal box back into my suitcase, kicked it into the closet, and called out that the door was open. My mother swept in wearing a Chanel tweed suit in pale pink, pearls at her throat, her silver blonde hair styled in the same elegant bob she'd worn since 1985. Linda Reynolds, at 80 years old, was a monument to the belief that presentation could overcome any disadvantage. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, working night shifts at Denver General while raising 2 daughters, and she'd spent every free moment teaching us that the way out of working-class struggle was through careful cultivation of grace, elegance, and strategic social climbing. Amanda had learned the lesson well. I'd learned it and then deliberately forgotten it the day I enlisted. Catherine. My mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe, and I watched her expression shift through a series of micro-expressions. Disappointment, resignation, forced optimism. You're wearing that? It's cashmere. It's appropriate for October in Denver. The restaurant isn't formal. It's the welcome dinner for Amanda's wedding to a man whose father is a decorated general. Appropriate isn't the standard we're aiming for, dear. She moved past me to the closet, already rifling through my limited wardrobe with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing my presentation for 58 years. Her fingers skipped over the navy dress I'd planned to wear tomorrow, paused on a cream-colored blouse that I'd bought specifically because it was inoffensive, and finally pulled out a pale blue cardigan that I'd forgotten I'd even packed. This, with your black slacks. And for heaven's sake, can you do something with your hair? Maybe some lipstick? You're not in the military anymore, Catherine. You're allowed to look like a woman. The barb was casual, reflexive, and it landed with the dull ache of something I'd felt so many times it no longer qualified as fresh pain. My mother had never understood my choice to enlist. To her, the military was where working-class kids with no options went to avoid poverty. It wasn't where her intelligent, capable daughter was supposed to end up. Not when Amanda was proving that the Reynolds girls could transcend their origins through education, charm, and strategic marriage. I changed into the cardigan without argument. Picked a fight over clothing would accomplish nothing except making me late, and I'd learned decades ago to choose my battles with surgical precision. My mother watched me apply a minimal amount of makeup, her lips pressed into a thin line of dissatisfaction, and then handed me a piece of hotel stationery folded in half. Amanda asked me to give this to you. Just some reminders for the weekend. You know how important this is to her. I unfolded the paper. Amanda's handwriting, neat, controlled, with little loops on the capital letters that she'd cultivated to look elegant, spelled out a list titled, Kat's rules for this weekend. 1. Don't talk to General Blackwell or any military guests about work. 2. If anyone asks about your career, say you're in a transition period. 3. Don't mention the divorce. Tacky. 4. Don't wear anything with military associations. 5. Stay in the background for photos. 6. Let Amanda shine. This is her day. The paper crumpled slightly in my grip before I could control the impulse. My mother noticed, of course. She noticed everything. Amanda's just anxious, dear. You know how she gets. And this wedding is costing a fortune. She wants everything perfect. She wants me invisible. She wants you appropriate. There's a difference. There wasn't really, but arguing would require explaining that I'd spent 35 years being professionally invisible, that I'd perfected the art of moving through rooms without leaving impressions, that I knew how to erase myself from memory so thoroughly that people I'd briefed couldn't pick me out of a lineup a week later. Amanda didn't need to give me instructions on how to disappear. I'd written the manual. I folded the list carefully and slipped it into my purse, right next to the encrypted phone that held enough classified material to end several political careers if it ever fell into the wrong hands. Ready? My mother's hand was already on the door handle, eager to get downstairs where the real preparations were happening, the social maneuvering, the strategic positioning, the careful performance of being exactly the kind of family that deserved proximity to a general's son. 1 second. I walked to my shoulder bag and pulled out my regular phone, checking the screen. No messages, no urgent calls. The world was managing to not explode without my immediate intervention, which felt both reassuring and vaguely disorienting. Retirement had been my decision, but some part of me still waited for the emergency alert that would pull me back into the game. We rode the elevator down in silence. My mother reapplied lipstick in the mirrored walls, checked her pearls, smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her jacket. I watched the floor numbers descend and tried to remember the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me for managing anxiety in social situations. The therapy had started after the divorce, court-mandated, actually, because Marcus had argued that my inability to express emotion or maintain intimacy stemmed from undiagnosed PTSD, and if we were dividing assets, he wanted documentation that my mental health issues had contributed to the marriage's failure. His lawyer had been good. My lawyer had been better, but the judge had still ordered 6 months of therapy, and I'd sat in Dr. Morrison's office every Tuesday at 3 p.m., carefully parsing out the minimum amount of truth necessary to satisfy the requirement without revealing anything classified. You compartmentalize, Dr. Morrison had said during our 4th session, his gray beard and kind eyes making him look like someone's favorite grandfather. It's a survival mechanism, necessary in your line of work, I'm sure. But Catherine, you're doing it with your family too, with your ex-husband, with me, even now. You've built walls so high and so strong that you're trapped inside them. I'd paid for 6 months of sessions and learned precisely nothing I didn't already know. The walls were there for a reason. They kept secrets in and vulnerability out, and that had worked perfectly fine until Marcus had decided he wanted a wife who could actually feel things and share them. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Amanda appeared immediately as if she'd been tracking our descent. She wore a champagne-colored Ralph Lauren dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, Louboutin heels that added 4 inches to her 5'4" frame, and a smile that looked genuine until you noticed it didn't reach her eyes. Mom, Kat, perfect timing. Everyone's gathering in the private dining room. The Blackwells just arrived. She linked arms with our mother and swept toward the restaurant, leaving me to follow like a tugboat trailing an ocean liner. I caught up as they entered Flagstaff House's private dining room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Boulder's city lights spreading out beneath us like scattered diamonds. The room held 30 people arranged in strategic clusters. I recognized most of them. Reynolds' cousins, aunts, uncles, Amanda's friends from her marketing firm, Thomas's business partners. And there, standing near the far windows with a glass of what looked like scotch, was General William Blackwell. He was exactly as I'd imagined from his file photos. 6'2", silver hair combed back from a face that geography and authority had carved into something resembling a marble bust. He wore a navy suit tailored within an inch of perfection. And even in civilian clothing, his posture broadcasted decades of command. His eyes, when they swept the room, missed nothing, the kind of tactical awareness that never fully retired. Thomas stood beside his father, shorter by 4 inches and softer in every way that mattered. He was a decent man, from what I'd observed during brief holiday visits over the past year. Kind to Amanda, patient with her anxieties, willing to fund her vision of a perfect wedding without complaint. But standing next to his father, he looked like a watercolor copy of an oil painting, recognizable but lacking the depth and intensity of the original. Amanda's voice rose in pitch as she made introductions, guiding our parents toward the Blackwells like a ship's captain navigating treacherous waters. I hung back, instinctively seeking the periphery of the room, where the less important guests gathered. A young woman in navy dress blues stood near the bar, nursing a glass of white wine and looking uncomfortable in the way junior officers always did at formal family events. I recognized her immediately. Lieutenant Sarah Blackwell, Thomas's daughter from his first marriage, 28 years old, intelligence specialist rating, and one of the brightest students I'd ever had the privilege to teach at Naval War College 4 years ago. She'd written a thesis on asymmetric warfare in the South China Sea that I'd kept for reference, and she'd gone on to a posting at Pacific Fleet that suggested someone in the Navy had recognized her potential. She saw me at the exact moment I saw her. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and I could see the recognition click into place. Commander Reynolds, who'd taught her advanced intelligence analysis, who'd written her a recommendation that had helped secure her current posting, who was supposed to be retired and definitely not standing in this private dining room pretending to be someone's mediocre sister. I shook my head once, a tiny movement, barely perceptible, but Sarah was trained to read subtle signals. Her mouth closed. She took a sip of wine and looked away, but the confusion remained written across her face. The moment broke when my mother's voice carried across the room, artificially bright with the kind of forced cheer she used when she was nervous. "General Blackwell, this is our daughter Catherine. Kat works with computers for the government. Nothing terribly exciting, but it's stable work." I'd crossed half the room without meaning to, pulled forward by the gravitational force of social obligation. General Blackwell turned, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other. His eyes were gray-blue, sharp as surgical steel, and they narrowed slightly as if trying to place something just out of reach in his memory. "Catherine Reynolds." He extended his hand, and his grip was exactly what I'd expected, firm, brief, assessing. "You work for Defense?" "Department of Defense, sir. Administrative support." The lie tasted like ashes, but it was the cover story I'd maintained for 35 years. Clerical work, filing, database management. The kind of job that made people's eyes glaze over when you described it, that invited no follow-up questions, that marked you as thoroughly unremarkable. "What division?" My mother jumped in before I could answer, her laugh brittle as glass. "Oh, Catherine's work is terribly boring. She's always said so herself. Let's not bore you with details, General. I'm so much more interested in hearing about your time at Pacific Command. Thomas says you oversaw operations across such a vast region." She steered the conversation away with the skill of someone who'd spent decades protecting her daughters from exposure, and General Blackwell allowed himself to be redirected. But his eyes lingered on me for just a moment longer than necessary, and I knew that sharp tactical mind was filing away an anomaly for later examination. I retreated to the bar, ordered sparkling water, and tried to blend into the wallpaper. Sarah found me 10 minutes later, positioning herself beside me at the bar with her back to the room, so our conversation would look casual to any observers. "Commander Reynolds," her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm so confused. What are you doing here?" "Amanda's my sister. I'm here for her wedding. But your family, they don't know?" "That information is classified, Lieutenant, and I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that classification extends to social events." "Of course, ma'am, but—" She stopped, struggling with something. "Does my grandfather know? He mentioned working with someone named C. Reynolds on the Taiwan assessment. Is that—" "Lieutenant," I kept my voice gentle but firm, "this is your family's celebration. Let's keep it that way. We never had this conversation." She nodded slowly, but the concern in her eyes didn't fade. Good officer instincts. She knew something was wrong but couldn't quite identify what. The dinner proceeded with the inevitability of a military operation. Courses appeared and disappeared, seared scallops, filet mignon, some kind of chocolate dessert that Amanda had probably agonized over for weeks. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when expected, and volunteered nothing. My father, George Reynolds, sat across from me looking vaguely uncomfortable in his Brooks Brothers suit. He'd spent 40 years as an accountant for a mid-sized Denver firm, retiring with a pension that was adequate but not generous. He'd always been a quiet man, more comfortable with spreadsheets than emotions, and he'd responded to my military career with the same bewildered acceptance he'd shown when I announced I was getting married. Pleased it was happening, confused about why it was necessary, relieved when it required nothing from him. Midway through dinner, Thomas stood and clinked his glass. The room quieted. I just want to thank everyone for coming to Denver to celebrate with us this weekend. Amanda and I are so grateful to have both our families here together. He reached down and squeezed Amanda's hand. Amanda's been planning this wedding for a year, and I know how much it means to her that everything's perfect. So please, be patient with us as we navigate what I'm told is going to be a very precisely scheduled weekend. Laughter rippled through the room. Thomas continued, thanking his father for flying in from Arlington, thanking my parents for raising such a wonderful daughter, thanking the universe in general for aligning to create this moment of domestic bliss. I watched Amanda's face as Thomas spoke. She glowed with happiness that looked real because it was real. My sister loved Thomas, genuinely loved him, and she'd found something I'd failed to maintain. A relationship that survived the grinding pressure of daily life, compromise, and mutual exposure. I was happy for her, truly, but I was also aware of the gulf between us, widening with every year until we were sisters in DNA only, strangers in everything that mattered. The dinner ended around 9:30. Guests began filtering out, heading back to their hotels or exploring Denver's nightlife. I made my escape as quickly as politeness allowed, claiming exhaustion from travel. My mother caught my arm as I headed for the elevators. Catherine, I need you to be on your best behavior this weekend. Please. Amanda has worked so hard for this. I know, Mom. What? I'm serious. No strange behavior, no awkward silences. Try to engage with people. And please, if the general or any of his military friends try to talk to you, just smile and excuse yourself. Don't try to impress them. You'll only embarrass yourself. The words landed with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten they were carrying a weapon. My mother genuinely believed she was protecting me from humiliation, from exposure, from the consequences of reaching above my station. She couldn't imagine that I didn't need protecting, that I'd been operating at altitude for decades, while she'd been worried about whether my shoes matched my dress. Understood. Good night, Mom. I rode the elevator up alone, grateful for the silence, and let myself into the suite that smelled faintly of the perfume my cousins had sprayed before leaving. The city sparkled outside my windows, vast and indifferent, and I stood there for a long time just breathing. My encrypted phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't have stored but recognized instantly. Sarah Blackwell. Commander, I'm so sorry if I made things awkward, but I'm worried about you. Your family doesn't know who you are. That can't be healthy. Are you okay? I typed back. I'm fine. This information remains classified. Enjoy your family celebration. But I wasn't fine. Standing in that expensive suite, wearing the cardigan my mother had chosen, carrying my sister's list of instructions on how to be less embarrassing, I felt something crack inside the careful structure I'd built over 35 years. Not a dramatic break, nothing that would show on the surface, just a hairline fracture in the foundation, the kind that weakens everything above it. I pulled out my laptop, not the encrypted one, just my personal computer, and opened my brokerage account. The numbers displayed across the screen with the calm objectivity of mathematics. $47,239 and $184.73. Lockheed Martin stock purchased in 2003, $12,040,000. Northrop Grumman bought during the defense spending surge, $8,720,000. Real estate investments. A condo in Arlington, a beach house in Outer Banks, a rental property in Austin, $18,200,000. And the trust fund from my grandmother, carefully invested and compounded over 2 decades. $7,979,184.73. I'd made my first major investment in January 2003, 3 months before the invasion of Iraq. I'd known it was coming. Not because I had classified intelligence about the invasion itself, but because I understood procurement patterns, budget allocations, and the way the Pentagon moved pieces around the chessboard before making decisive strikes. I'd taken the $2 million my grandmother Evelyn had left me and put it all in defense contractors. Evelyn had been the only person in my family who'd understood my choice to enlist. She'd served as a Navy nurse in Korea, back when women in uniform were considered radical and slightly scandalous. She'd written me a letter before she died, tucked into the will that my parents had been shocked to discover left her entire estate to me, rather than split evenly between her two granddaughters. Catherine, the letter had begun in her elegant script, you are the only woman in this family who understands that strength doesn't come from being seen, but from knowing who you are regardless of whether anyone notices. Your mother wanted me to leave this money to both you girls equally, to be fair. But fairness isn't the same as wisdom. Amanda will marry well and live comfortably. You've chosen a harder path, one that requires you to be invisible precisely because you're doing work that matters. Use this money to build security that doesn't depend on anyone else. Don't let them make you small. I'd cried when I read that letter, sitting alone in my apartment in Arlington, and it remained the only time anyone in my family had truly seen me. The money had grown. I'd invested carefully, conservatively by some standards, but with the advantage of understanding global security dynamics in ways that Wall Street analysts couldn't. I drove a 2018 Toyota Camry. I lived in a 2-bedroom condo worth $280,000 in a perfectly average neighborhood. I bought my clothes at Nordstrom during sales, and my family assumed I was perpetually broke, living paycheck to paycheck, someone to be pitied, and occasionally offered loans that I never accepted. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The Rocky Mountains rose black against the starlit sky, ancient and indifferent to human drama. Somewhere out there, in rooms I couldn't see, intelligence analysts were tracking threats I'd helped them understand. Somewhere, young officers were implementing strategies I'd helped design. And here, in this expensive hotel suite, I was Catherine Reynolds, the disappointing daughter, the mediocre sister, the failed wife who couldn't hold a marriage together because she was too cold, too focused on work, too fundamentally broken to deserve love. The duality was exhausting. A knock at the door interrupted my spiral. I checked the peephole and found Thomas Blackwell standing in the hallway, hands in his pockets, expression uncomfortable. I opened the door. Thomas, everything okay? Hey, Kat, sorry to bother you. Can we talk for a minute? I stepped back and let him in. He walked to the window, looked out at the city for a long moment, and then turned to face me with the expression of someone about to deliver unpleasant news. Look, I know this is awkward, but Amanda asked me to talk to you about this weekend. She's just really stressed and she wants everything to go perfectly. I understand, I got her list of rules. He winced. Yeah, about that. She didn't mean for it to sound so harsh, but with my dad here and all the military people coming to the ceremony tomorrow, she's worried about... He stopped, clearly struggling to find diplomatic phrasing. She's worried I'll embarrass her by trying to talk to them about work. Not embarrass, just... Kat, my dad is intense. He spent his whole life around high achievers, people at the top of their fields. He doesn't have a lot of patience for civilians who don't understand military culture. I don't want you to feel bad if he's dismissive or if his friends don't engage with you. It's not personal. They operate at a different level. The condescension was so complete, so unconscious, that it took my breath away. Thomas genuinely believed he was doing me a favor, protecting me from humiliation, warning me away from conversations I couldn't possibly contribute to, with people whose world I couldn't begin to understand. I appreciate the heads up, I heard myself say, voice flat and emotionless. Amanda loves you, Kat. You know that. She just wants this weekend to be perfect, and maybe if you just kind of keep a low profile. Don't try too hard to impress anyone. Just be yourself, but quietly. Be yourself, but quietly. The instruction manual for invisibility, delivered with a smile. I'll stay out of the way. Relief washed over his face. Thanks, Kat. You're being really reasonable about this. That's what I told Amanda. I said Kat's not going to cause problems. She knows her place. He left, probably feeling good about himself, proud of handling a delicate situation with tact. I stood in the center of the suite and felt the crack in my foundation widen slightly. My encrypted phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Sarah. It was a number I knew by heart. Pentagon Operations Center. I answered. Reynolds. Commander. The voice belonged to a young analyst I'd trained 3 years ago. Sorry to bother you during leave, but we have a developing situation. Chinese naval maneuvers near Taiwan Strait. Unusual patterns. SecDef is requesting your assessment by 0600 tomorrow. She's got a G7 call at 0800 and needs to be briefed before. I looked at the clock. 10:47 p.m. Amanda's wedding ceremony started at 11 Honquak a.m. I had 7 hours to write an intelligence assessment that might prevent an international incident, then show up at a cathedral and pretend to be nothing more than a mediocre government clerk with a computer job. Tell the secretary I'll have preliminary analysis to her by 0500. Full brief by 0800 if she needs it. Thank you, Commander. I know you're supposed to be. It's fine. Send me the raw data. I hung up and pulled out my encrypted laptop. The screen glowed to life, demanding biometric authentication and 2 separate passcodes before granting access. Files began downloading: satellite imagery, naval positioning data, communications intercepts that had been parsed by AI but needed human analysis to understand the deeper patterns. The world outside my window faded. The wedding, Amanda's rules, Thomas's condescension, my mother's disappointment, all of it receded as I slipped into the familiar rhythm of strategic analysis. This at least I understood. This I was good at. This mattered in ways that seating charts and color schemes never would. My fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling together threads of intelligence into a coherent picture. 3 Chinese Type 055 destroyers moving in formation. Submarine activity suggesting coordination with surface vessels. Electronic warfare signatures consistent with jamming exercises. But the positioning was wrong for offensive operations. The timing didn't match invasion protocols. This was theater, a display meant to probe American response times and test new deterrence strategies. I wrote steadily, translating complex technical intelligence into clear strategic recommendations. Alert PACOM forces to Bravo status. Position carrier groups to demonstrate awareness without escalating. Coordinate with Japanese and Australian allies to show unified response. Do not scramble interceptors unless Chinese vessels cross median line. Do not interpret as precursor to invasion. By 5:47 a.m., I'd sent a 23-page assessment to 3 separate secure email addresses, encrypted with protocols that would self-destruct if anyone unauthorized tried to access them. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached, but the work was solid, the kind of analysis that could save lives by preventing miscalculation. I closed the laptop and realized I'd been working for 7 hours straight without food, water, or bathroom break. The suite was still dark, my cousins still out wherever they'd spent the night. The city beyond the windows was beginning to wake, pale dawn light touching the mountain peaks. In 6 hours, I would put on the sage green bridesmaid dress Amanda had selected. I would stand at an altar and smile for photos that would exclude me from the important shots. I would be the embarrassing sister, kept at arm's length from anyone who mattered, protected from my own inadequacy by family members who loved me but didn't respect me. Or I could do something different. The thought arrived quietly, without drama. I could simply stop participating in my own erasure. I could stop protecting my family from the truth. I could stop hiding behind classifications that, while real, had also become an excuse for maintaining walls that served no one. I couldn't tell them everything. Security clearances didn't work that way. But I could stop lying by omission. I could stop accepting their assumptions. I could stop being small because it made them comfortable. The decision settled into my bones like certainty. Whatever happened this weekend, I was done being invisible. I showered, changed into running clothes, and headed down to the hotel gym. 45 minutes on the treadmill, feeling my body wake up and my mind clear. When I returned to the suite, my cousins were there, hungover and enthusiastic about recounting their adventures at a club called The Church. Kat, you should have come. There were so many cute guys. When's the last time you went out and just had fun? Can't remember, I said, which was true. Fun hadn't been on my priority list for approximately 35 years. They chattered while I made coffee, telling me about music I'd never heard, and social dynamics I couldn't begin to parse. I listened with half an ear, mentally reviewing my assessment from last night and wondering if the secretary had read it yet. My encrypted phone buzzed. Text message from a restricted number. Analysis received. SecDef briefing moved to standby for conference call if needed. I checked the time. 8:17 a.m. Ceremony at 11 o'clock. If they needed me on a conference call at 9:30, I'd have to take it, even if it meant missing photos, even if it meant Amanda's fury. The Taiwan Strait mattered more than bridesmaid schedules. My regular phone lit up with increasingly frantic texts from Amanda. Where was I? Why wasn't I answering? The hairstylist was waiting at the cathedral. Did I even care about her wedding? I texted back, "On my way, sorry, work call." Her response came immediately. "Kat, no work today. This is my day." I stared at the message and felt something shift inside me, the hairline crack widening into something that might become a chasm if I let it. "Sorry," I typed. "Some things can't wait." I arrived at St. John's Cathedral at 9:15 a.m., dressed in my bridesmaid attire with my hair still damp. Amanda took one look at me and her face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a furious crimson. "Where have you been? You look terrible. The photographer wanted to do pre-ceremony shots and you weren't here." "I had a work emergency. You don't have important work, Kat. You file paperwork. This is my wedding day and you're already ruining it." The words hung in the air between us, and I watched my sister's face realize she'd said something unforgivable. But the damage was done, and more importantly, I was tired of pretending it hadn't been done hundreds of times before in smaller, quieter ways. "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't have important work. I'll try not to ruin anything else." I walked past her into the cathedral's preparation room, where other bridesmaids were getting hair and makeup done. My encrypted phone buzzed in my clutch. Conference call in 10 minutes. The cathedral was beautiful in that specifically expensive way wealthy people achieved when they rented spaces for weddings. White roses and eucalyptus everywhere, ribbons in Amanda's carefully selected sage green, programs printed on heavy cardstock that probably cost more per piece than my first month's military salary. I found a quiet corner, the small sacristy behind the altar where priests prepared for mass, pulled out my encrypted phone, dialed into the secure conference line. "Commander Reynolds," said the voice of the Secretary of Defense. "Good morning. I've read your assessment. Walk me through your reasoning on the positioning analysis." For 20 minutes, I explained Chinese naval doctrine, historical patterns, and the specific signatures that indicated these maneuvers were about demonstrating capability rather than preparing for invasion. I recommended a measured response, alert but not aggressive, aware but not escalating. The Secretary asked sharp questions. I provided sharper answers. "Excellent work, Commander. I'm briefing the President at 1100. Your analysis will be central to our posture." The call ended at 9:47 a.m. I had 13 minutes before the ceremony started. I opened the sacristy door and found Sarah Blackwell standing there, eyes wide. "Commander Reynolds, I heard your voice and She stopped. "You just briefed the Secretary of Defense about Taiwan while hiding in a church, technically a cathedral. Ma'am, this is insane. Your family doesn't know. My grandfather doesn't know you're the C. Reynolds who wrote his Pacific Command briefings. You're standing in a bridesmaid dress about to walk down an aisle, and you just potentially prevented a war. Welcome to my life, Lieutenant." "But why? Why not just tell them? They should be proud of you." "Pride requires understanding. My family can't understand what they're not cleared to know. And after a while, it became easier to let them believe the worst than to fight for recognition I couldn't fully claim." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, ma'am." Maybe it was, but it was also my reality, and I'd made peace with it a long time ago. Or I'd thought I had. The organ music started, wedding march. I needed to get into position. Sarah caught my arm as I passed. "Commander, for what it's worth, I'm honored to know who you really are. And when this weekend explodes, because I think it's going to, I've got your back." "It's not going to explode, Lieutenant. I'm going to stand quietly, smile for photos, and let my sister have her perfect day." Sarah's expression said she didn't believe me, and honestly, I wasn't sure I believed myself. I took my place in the line of bridesmaids. The cathedral was full, 200 guests in their finest clothes, waiting to witness Amanda and Thomas promise forever to each other. General Blackwell sat in the front row, ramrod straight, even in civilian clothes. his eyes scanning the room with the tactical awareness of someone who'd spent 40 years assuming every space was potentially hostile. The ceremony began. We processed down the aisle in carefully choreographed order. I kept my eyes forward, my expression neutral, my posture perfect out of decades of military bearing that I couldn't quite suppress. And then, halfway through the ceremony, as the pastor was intoning something about love and commitment, my encrypted phone vibrated in my clutch bag. Flash priority message. Chinese vessels cross median line. Need immediate assessment. Stand by for conference call. I looked up and met Sarah's eyes across the cathedral. She'd felt her own phone buzz. She'd be getting similar alerts through her chain of command. The ceremony continued around us, oblivious to the fact that in the South China Sea, tensions were escalating towards something that could change everything. My phone buzzed again. Conference call in 15 minutes. I had a choice. Stay silent, invisible, appropriate, or step out of the shadows and let my family see me, really see me, for the first time in 35 years. The hairline crack in my foundation widened into a chasm, and I stepped toward the edge, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. The pastor's voice washed over the congregation like white noise, words about commitment and partnership blending into meaningless sound, as my encrypted phone continued its insistent vibration against my hip. I stood in the line of bridesmaids, third from the left, holding a bouquet of white roses and sage-green eucalyptus that matched the ribbon tied around the stems. Amanda had selected everything down to the specific shade of greenery, and now none of it mattered because somewhere in the South China Sea, Chinese warships had just crossed a line that could trigger the exact escalation I'd warned against in my assessment 6 hours ago. Sarah caught my eye from where she stood with Thomas's side of the family. Her face was pale, jaw tight. She'd received the same alerts I had, though through different channels. Her clearance level was lower, which meant she knew something significant was happening, but not the full scope. I knew everything, which made it exponentially worse. The phone buzzed again, not just a message this time, an incoming call. I'd set it to silent, but the vibration felt loud enough to echo through the cathedral. A woman in the pew beside me glanced over, frowning at the disruption during what was supposed to be a sacred moment. Amanda and Thomas stood at the altar, exchanging vows they'd written themselves. Something about being each other's home, about building a future together, about choosing each other every day. Pretty words that meant something to them but felt hollow when weighed against the very real possibility that decisions made in the next hour could affect millions of lives. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call, then a text. Commander Reynolds, urgent, Chinese vessels approaching Taiwanese waters. SecDef needs immediate consultation. Conference call in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The ceremony would run another 25, maybe 30 if the pastor got long-winded during his blessing. Then photos would take another hour. By the time I could reasonably extract myself without causing a scene, whatever decisions needed to be made would have already been made. Possibly the wrong ones, made without the analysis that had taken me 7 hours to compile. I looked at Amanda, radiant in her Vera Wang gown, with its 3,000 Swarovski crystals catching light from the stained glass windows. This was her moment, the culmination of a year's worth of planning and a lifetime of believing that the perfect wedding would somehow validate all her choices. She dreamed about this day since she was 6 years old, planning imaginary ceremonies with stuffed animals as guests, and I was about to ruin it. The math was brutal but clear. One woman's perfect day versus potential military confrontation that could destabilize an entire region. Personal happiness versus strategic necessity. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, but that didn't make it easier. I waited until the pastor asked everyone to be seated for a reading from Corinthians. The rustle of 200 people sitting provided enough cover for me to slip out of my position in the bridesmaid line. I caught Amanda's eye as I moved, saw her face register confusion, then alarm, then fury as she realized I was leaving in the middle of her ceremony. The sacristy door closed behind me with a soft click that felt thunderous. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 12, with vestments hanging on hooks and a small table where priests prepared communion. A single window looked out onto the cathedral's side garden, showing roses that were probably also chosen to match Amanda's color scheme. I pulled out my encrypted phone and dialed into the conference line. The connection took 15 seconds, security protocols layering on top of each other. confirming identity through voice recognition and biometric data transmitted through the phone's specialized hardware. A voice I recognized immediately. Commander Reynolds, thank you for joining us. We have Secretary Martinez, Admiral Hawkins from PACOM, and myself, General Harrison from Joint Chiefs. We've got a developing situation that contradicts your assessment from this morning. I could hear the subtext clearly. Your analysis said this wouldn't escalate. It's escalating. Explain. Walk me through what changed. Secretary Martinez took over, her voice crisp and controlled despite the early morning hour in Washington. At 0547 Pacific Time, 3 Chinese Type 055 destroyers crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait. Not just approaching, actually crossed. That's new behavior. They're maintaining position approximately 12 nautical miles from Taiwanese waters. Taiwan has scrambled F-16s. We've got the USS Ronald Reagan carrier group on alert status. The question is whether this is precursor to something larger or if they're testing boundaries. I pulled up the satellite feed on my phone, scrolling through the tactical display that updated in near real time. The Chinese vessels showed as red triangles, their position exactly where Martinez described. But the formation was wrong for offensive operations. The spacing between ships suggested defensive posture, and the electronic warfare signatures I could see in the data stream indicated they were broadcasting their position, rather than trying to hide it. This is theater, I heard myself say, the analysis clicking into place with the certainty that came from decades of reading these patterns. They want us to see them, want us to react. The formation is defensive. The EW signatures are loud enough to wake the dead. And if you check the submarine activity, I scrolled further, confirming what I suspected. Their sub is surfaced in broadcasting. Nobody broadcasts submarine positions unless they're making a point. What point? Admiral Hawkins, whose voice carried the gravelly exhaustion of someone who'd been managing this crisis for hours. That they can cross the line, that they will cross the line, but that they're not interested in actual confrontation today. This is about establishing precedent, not initiating conflict. They're telling us the old rules don't apply anymore, but they're doing it in a way that leaves room for de-escalation. Silence on the line while they processed. Then Martinez. So your recommendation is? Don't scramble carriers. Don't match their escalation. Issue diplomatic protest through official channels, but militarily, hold position. They want us to blink first, to overreact so they can claim provocation. If we stay calm, they look aggressive without justification. They'll hold position for 6 to 8 hours, then withdraw. They get their propaganda win about sovereignty, we get to demonstrate restraint, and nobody fires a shot. And if you're wrong? Harrison's skepticism was warranted. He didn't know me, didn't have decades of my track record to reference. For all he knew, I was some analyst who'd gotten lucky on one assessment. Then I'm wrong and you'll have had forces at alert status anyway. But I'm not wrong, General. I've been tracking Chinese naval doctrine for 23 years. This is pattern-consistent behavior scaled up in scope but not in threat level. They're being deliberately provocative in a measured way. That's not how you start a war. That's how you shift diplomatic leverage. Martinez made a decision. Okay, Admiral Hawkins, maintain alert posture but no mobilization. Monitor their movements but don't engage unless they cross into Taiwanese territorial waters. Commander Reynolds, I need you on standby for the next 6 hours in case this changes. Ma'am, I'm at a family wedding. I can monitor feeds remotely, but I may not be immediately available for... Commander, I don't care if you're at your own wedding. This takes priority. Keep your phone on and be ready to brief if the situation shifts. The line disconnected. I stood in the sacristy holding a phone that contained more classified intelligence than most generals saw in their careers, wearing a sage green bridesmaid dress that cost $400, and trying to calculate how much damage I'd just done to my relationship with my sister. The organ music swelled, the recessional, which meant the ceremony was ending. I'd missed the vows, the ring exchange, the kiss, the presentation of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Blackwell to their guests. I'd missed everything that Amanda had spent a year planning, and I'd done it to take a phone call that she would never understand the importance of. I opened the sacristy door and stepped back into the cathedral, just as the wedding party began processing down the aisle. Amanda saw me immediately. Her face went through a remarkable series of expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Shock, recognition, fury, and then something harder. a kind of cold rage that suggested she was done trying to understand me and had moved directly to judgment. The reception wasn't scheduled until 7 that evening, which left the afternoon for photos. The photographer had scouted locations around Denver, the cathedral steps, a nearby park with autumn foliage, the hotel's rooftop terrace. Amanda had a detailed schedule that allocated exactly 90 minutes for this process, broken down by grouping: immediate family, extended family, wedding party, couple shots, casual candids. I tried to slip into position with the other bridesmaids, but Amanda's voice cut across the cathedral steps where everyone was gathering. "Cat, a word." The tone left no room for negotiation. I followed her to the side of the building, out of sight of the photographer and guests. Her veil caught on a bush, and she yanked it free with enough force to tear the delicate lace. "Where were you? You left in the middle of my vows. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Everyone saw you walk out." "I had a work emergency." The laugh that came out of her was sharp enough to cut. A work emergency. Right. What kind of emergency could possibly be more important than your own sister's wedding? Did someone's printer break? Did the government run out of paper clips? The sarcasm landed exactly where she'd aimed it, at my supposed mediocrity, at the worthlessness of work she couldn't imagine mattered to anyone. Part of me wanted to tell her the truth right there, to explain that I'd just helped prevent potential military escalation that could have affected her future, her children's future, the entire world she took for granted. But security protocols had been drilled into me for 35 years, and old habits died hard. "I'm sorry I missed part of the ceremony. I'll make sure I'm in all the photos you need." "That's not the point. The point is that you don't take anything seriously. You never have. You drift through life doing your mediocre little job, and then you show up at important events and act like you're doing us a favor by being present. Well, I'm tired of it, Kat. I'm tired of making excuses for you. I'm tired of pretending you're not a disappointment." The word hung between us like smoke: disappointment. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, but it was the first time Amanda had said it directly to my face, without the cushion of parental mediation or holiday wine to blur the edges. "I understand you're upset. Today is important to you." Don't patronize me. God, you sound like a therapist. Just admit that you don't care. Admit that my wedding, my happiness, my life, none of it matters to you because you're so wrapped up in whatever weird, isolated existence you've built for yourself. My phone buzzed. Update from the Pacific. Chinese vessels holding position as predicted, no change in posture. I needed to log this information, needed to prepare for the next briefing in 4 hours, needed to do a dozen things that Amanda couldn't know about and wouldn't value even if she did. "You're right," I heard myself say, because sometimes the path of least resistance was the only path available. "I'm sorry I'm not the sister you deserve." The apology seemed to deflate her anger slightly, replacing it with something worse: pity mixed with vindication. She'd always suspected I was fundamentally flawed, and now I'd confirmed it. "Just try to be present for the rest of the day, okay? Try to pretend like you're happy for me." The photos took 2 hours instead of 90 minutes, because nothing ever went according to schedule when 200 people were involved. I stood where the photographer positioned me, smiled when instructed, and faded into the background of every shot that didn't explicitly require me. The other bridesmaids chatted about their lives: jobs at tech startups, recent engagements, vacation plans to Bali. I nodded along and contributed nothing, a ghost in sage green chiffon. General Blackwell arrived for the family photos looking imposing, even in civilian clothes. He'd changed from the suit he'd worn to the ceremony into more casual attire: khakis and a button-down that probably cost more than my entire outfit. But it was his bearing that commanded attention. The way he stood like he was perpetually addressing troops. The way his eyes assessed every person and situation with tactical precision. He looked at me during the family groupings, and I saw the recognition still hovering just out of reach in his expression. He knew something didn't add up about Catherine Reynolds, the quiet sister who worked with computers. He just couldn't quite identify what was wrong with the picture. Sarah maneuvered herself next to me during a break between shots. "Commander, we need to talk. The briefing this morning—" "Not now, Lieutenant." "Ma'am, with respect, my grandfather is asking questions. He remembered working with someone named C. Reynolds on Pacific Theater assessments. He's starting to put pieces together." "Then he'll figure it out or he won't. Either way, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" "After your family spent decades thinking you're nobody." After you've sacrificed everything for a job that requires you to be invisible to the people who should see you most. The words landed harder than she'd probably intended because they weren't wrong. I had sacrificed everything: marriage, relationship with family, any kind of normal life. And for what? So I could hide in sacristies taking conference calls while my sister got married? So I could stand in group photos feeling like an imposter in my own family? The photographer called for one more round of shots, this time on the hotel rooftop where Denver's skyline provided a dramatic backdrop. The wind picked up, threatening to destroy Amanda's carefully styled hair. Someone produced an army of bobby pins and industrial-strength hairspray. The comedy of it struck me as absurd. All this effort to freeze one moment in time, to create the illusion of perfection, that would inevitably be revealed as artifice the moment real life intruded. My encrypted phone buzzed continuously throughout the photos. Updates every 15 minutes. Chinese vessels maintaining position. Taiwanese fighters return to base. Diplomatic channels opening. The situation was de-escalating exactly as I'd predicted. And somewhere in Washington, the Secretary of Defense was making decisions based on my analysis. That work mattered. It saved lives. And yet, standing on this rooftop watching Amanda pose with her new husband, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd become unmoored from everything that made life worth living. The reception finally started at 7:15, delayed by photo overruns and traffic. The Brown Palace Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into Amanda's vision of sophisticated elegance: chandeliers dripping with crystal, tables set with china that probably cost more per plate than most people's monthly rent, centerpieces of white roses, and that ubiquitous sage-green eucalyptus. 300 guests filled the space, their voices creating a wall of sound that made discreet conversation nearly impossible. I found my assigned seat at table 14, nowhere near the head table, sandwiched between a cousin I'd met twice and one of Thomas's business partners who spent the cocktail hour explaining cryptocurrency trading strategies I didn't care about. The seating chart was its own kind of statement: family but not important family, present but not valued, invited but not truly wanted. Dinner proceeded in waves: salad with pears and candied walnuts, beef Wellington that looked impressive but tasted like expensive cardboard, speeches from Thomas's best man and Amanda's maid of honor, both of which followed the predictable arc of funny anecdote, sentimental moment, toast to the future. Our parents spoke briefly, choking up at appropriate moments, talking about watching their daughter grow into a remarkable woman who'd found her perfect match. Nobody asked me to speak. Amanda hadn't even considered putting me on the roster of toasts, which was fine because what would I have said? Congratulations on finding someone who sees you? Unlike our family, who spent 35 years looking directly through me. The bitterness surprised me. I'd thought I'd made peace with my role as the forgotten daughter, the disappointing sister, the one who'd chosen wrong and lived with the consequences. But something about today, the ceremony I'd missed, the photos I'd faded into, the table assignment that put me with strangers, had cracked something open that I'd thought was safely sealed. General Blackwell stood to give a toast around 8:30. The ballroom quieted immediately, hundreds of conversations cutting off as if someone had flipped a switch. That was power. Not the kind that came from rank or title, but the kind earned through decades of commanding respect through competence and character. I've had the privilege of serving this country for 40 years. His voice carried easily across the ballroom, that command presence making amplification almost unnecessary. I've worked with presidents, advised senators, and led operations that I still can't talk about. But standing here tonight, I'm not General Blackwell. I'm just a father who's grateful that my son found a partner worthy of him. He talked about Thomas's childhood, about watching him grow into a man of integrity and kindness. He talked about welcoming Amanda into their family, about the strength she'd shown in building her career, and now in choosing to build a life with someone she loved. It was a good speech, touching without being maudlin, personal without being embarrassing. And then his gaze swept the room and landed on me. In my career, I've learned that the people who matter most are often the ones we overlook: the intelligence analysts working midnight shifts, the logistics officers ensuring supplies reach forward operating bases, the countless men and women doing crucial work that never gets recognition because it's classified or technical or simply not glamorous enough to capture public attention. Was he talking about me? Or was I projecting, reading meaning into words that were simply part of a broader point about unsung heroes? Success isn't always visible. Sometimes the most important contributions happen in silence, made by people who will never receive public recognition for what they've sacrificed. Our eyes met across the ballroom. In that moment, I knew that he knew. Maybe not all of it, maybe not the specifics, but enough. Enough to recognize that something about quiet, disappointing Catherine Reynolds didn't match the story her family told about her. The toast ended, glasses raised. Amanda and Thomas kissed to applause and cheering. But General Blackwell's eyes remained on me for just a moment longer, a question forming that he was too polite to ask in public, but wouldn't forget. The dancing started. First dance for the bride and groom, then parents joining, then the wedding party, then everyone. I escaped to the terrace outside the ballroom, grateful for cold October air and momentary solitude. Denver spread out below, lights marking streets and buildings in geometric patterns that made sense from altitude, but felt chaotic at ground level. My encrypted phone buzzed. Conference call scheduled for 2200, 30 minutes from now. Chinese vessels showing signs of preparing to withdraw. But confirmation needed before PACOM stood down alert status. Commander Reynolds, I turned to find General Blackwell standing in the terrace doorway, silhouetted against the warm light of the ballroom. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his tie, but his posture remained military straight. I'm not a commander anymore, sir. I retired 2 years ago. Did you? Or did you just move into consulting work that requires the same clearance levels you held during active duty? Smart. He'd been thinking about this, putting pieces together. The question was how much he'd actually figured out versus how much he was guessing. I work with computers for the Department of Defense. Administrative support, database management, nothing exciting. He stepped fully onto the terrace, closing the door behind us. I don't believe you. More importantly, I don't think you believe that lie anymore either. I know C. Reynolds. I've read every assessment with that signature for the past 8 years. Some of the best strategic intelligence I've ever encountered came across my desk with those initials. And today, during your sister's wedding, I watched you slip away to take a call that you treated as more important than the ceremony. Lots of people named Reynolds in the military, sir. Not lots of people with the specific analytical signature I recognize in those reports. Not lots of people who stand at attention when they're nervous, who use military brevity in casual conversation, who assess exits and sightlines the way you've been doing all weekend. The observation was so accurate it took my breath away. I hadn't even realized I'd been doing those things. They were ingrained habits from decades of operations, automatic responses that I couldn't fully suppress even in civilian contexts. You wrote the Taiwan assessment I read this morning, didn't you? The one that predicted this would be theater rather than actual escalation. No point in denying it anymore. Yes, sir. And you took a call during your sister's wedding ceremony to brief the Secretary of Defense when the situation developed. Yes, sir. He nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted from suspicion to understanding to a kind of resigned disappointment. Does your family know? No, sir. Why not? Because they can't know. Security clearances don't work that way. And because I stopped, surprised by the honesty that wanted to surface. Because it became easier to let them think the worst than to fight for recognition I couldn't fully claim. That's not a reason, that's giving up. With respect, sir, you don't know my family. You don't know what it's like to spend 35 years being told you're wasting your life while simultaneously doing work you can't defend yourself with. The silence became a habit, and then it became who I am. The silence became a prison, he corrected, and you're still locked inside it even though you retired 2 years ago and could have told them the truth at any point since then. The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. I'd maintained the lie after retirement not because I had to, but because I didn't know how to stop. Because telling the truth would require confronting 3 decades of assumptions and resentments that had calcified into unchangeable fact in my family's eyes. What are you going to do with this information, sir? That depends. Are you planning to keep hiding? Keep letting your sister treat you like an embarrassment? Keep accepting your parents' pity and disappointment when you've actually accomplished more than most flag officers I know? I don't see what choice I have. If I tell them now, they'll think I'm delusional or lying. They've built an entire narrative about who I am. That narrative has become comfortable for them. Disrupting it would only cause pain. Pain for them or pain for you? Both. Neither. The truth was more complicated than simple pain, wrapped up in decades of complicated feelings about duty and family, and the fundamental incompatibility between the person I'd become and the person they needed me to be. My phone buzzed. Conference call starting. I needed to take it. "Excuse me, sir, I have to." "I know. Go brief the secretary. Do your job. But, Commander, this conversation isn't over. What you're doing to yourself isn't sustainable, and eventually something will break. Better that you choose how and when than let circumstance choose for you." I stepped away to take the call, giving him my back more out of habit than rudeness. The secure line connected. Secretary Martinez's voice came through clear and crisp. "Commander Reynolds, update me on the situation." For 10 minutes, I walked the terrace, giving a briefing that synthesized satellite intelligence, signals intercepts, and historical pattern analysis into actionable recommendations. The Chinese vessels were preparing to withdraw as predicted. Taiwan was standing down alert status. The diplomatic protests were perfunctory and expected. The crisis, such as it was, had passed without incident. "Excellent work, Commander. Your assessment was accurate. We'll debrief more thoroughly tomorrow. But for now, stand down from alert status. Enjoy the rest of your evening." The call ended. I turned and found not just General Blackwell watching me from the doorway, but Sarah as well, and Thomas, and, most alarmingly, Amanda, who must have come looking for me when I disappeared from the reception. 4 people who'd just heard me brief the Secretary of Defense while standing on a hotel terrace in a bridesmaid dress. Thomas spoke first, his confusion so complete it rendered him almost comical. "Kat, who were you talking to? Did you just brief the Secretary of Defense?" Amanda's face had gone through shock into something harder and more dangerous. "What is this? What kind of game are you playing?" "It's not a game," Sarah interjected. "Your sister is Commander Catherine Reynolds, retired Naval Intelligence. She taught me at War College. She's one of the most respected strategic analysts in the defense community." "That's insane!" Amanda's voice rose. "Kat works in IT. She files paperwork. She stopped, unable to articulate what I was, because the only categories she had for me didn't include competence or achievement. General Blackwell stepped forward. "Your sister is the C. Reynolds who wrote assessments I relied on during my time at Pacific Command. She has clearance levels that exceed mine. And today, while you were getting married, she helped prevent a potential military confrontation in the Taiwan Strait." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear traffic noise from the street 14 floors below. Amanda stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Thomas looked between his father and me, trying to reconcile the impossible. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, expression mixing vindication with concern. "You're lying," Amanda finally managed. "This is some weird joke or delusion or—" "Kat, why are you doing this? Why are you pretending to be important? Is this because I didn't put you in more photos? Is this some pathetic attempt to—" "I'm not pretending." My voice came out flat, exhausted. "I'm not lying. I'm a retired commander with 35 years of service. I have a Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Bronze Stars currently sitting in my suitcase. I've briefed 3 different presidents. My security clearance is TS-SCI with SAP access, which means I know things that could end political careers if I ever disclose them. And yes, I spent your entire wedding managing a crisis in the South China Sea because that's my job, was my job, and I'm apparently incapable of not doing it even when I should be focused on family." Thomas found his voice. "But you drive a Camry. You live in that small condo in Arlington. You don't act like someone important?" "No, because being important meant being invisible. Being successful meant no one could know about it. I spent 35 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, and I got so good at it that my own family believed the performance." Amanda's shock was calcifying into rage. "So what, you've been lying to us for decades? You've let us think you were nobody while you were actually—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. "I never lied. I just never corrected your assumptions. There's a difference." "That's bullshit! That's lying by omission, and you know it!" "You're right. It is. But it was also necessary because my work was classified, and explaining it would have required violating security protocols. So I let you believe what you wanted to believe, and over time, that became easier than fighting for recognition I couldn't claim." General Blackwell's voice cut through the escalating tension. "Amanda, I understand you're shocked, but directing your anger at your sister is misplaced. She spent her entire adult life protecting this country, often at great personal cost. The fact that she had to do it in silence doesn't diminish the value of that service. Amanda whirled on him. With all due respect, General, you don't understand our family. Kat has always been like this. Distant, cold, prioritizing work over people. She missed my college graduation. She missed our grandmother's funeral. She got divorced because she couldn't be bothered to actually be present in her marriage. And now she's saying it was all because of some important secret job. That's just an excuse for being a bad sister, a bad daughter, and a bad person. The words landed like artillery fire, each one finding its target. I felt something crack inside me, not dramatically but definitively. The final fracture in the foundation I'd been building for 35 years. You're right, I heard myself say, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Too calm, too controlled. I missed your graduation because I was in Yemen coordinating an extraction operation. I missed Grandma's funeral because I was briefing the Joint Chiefs on submarine movements in the Arctic. I got divorced because I had PTSD from operations I couldn't tell my husband about. And when he asked why I woke up screaming, I had to lie because the truth was classified. I pulled up my sleeve, exposing the 3-inch scar on my wrist. You wanted me to hide this for photos because it's ugly. I got it pushing a 22-year-old corpsman out of the path of shrapnel from a malfunctioning rocket. He lived. I got this scar and a Navy Cross that I've never shown anyone in this family because you made it very clear that my service was embarrassing to you. Amanda's face had gone pale. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because I couldn't tell you. But you know what? After a while, I realized you didn't want to know. It was easier for all of you to believe I was a failure than to ask questions that might complicate your comfortable narrative. My mother's voice came from behind us. I hadn't heard her come out onto the terrace, but there she stood in her pink Chanel suit, face white with shock. Catherine, what's happening? Thomas came to get us, said something about you and the general, and is this true? Are you actually... Yes, Mom, I'm actually important. Successful, even. I've spent 35 years doing work that mattered while you apologized to everyone about my mediocre government job. I've saved lives while you told relatives I was finding myself. I've briefed presidents while you explained to your book club that at least I was stable, even if I wasn't impressive like Amanda. The terrace was filling with family now. My father, aunts and uncles, cousins who'd heard raised voices and come to investigate. The wedding reception continued inside, oblivious to the explosion happening just beyond the doors. My father pushed through the crowd. Margaret, what is going on? Catherine has apparently been living a secret life, my mother managed, her voice shaking. She's been lying to us for decades about... I didn't lie! The words came out sharper than intended. I followed security protocols. I maintained operational security. I protected classified information. But yes, I also took the easy path. I let you believe I was nobody because arguing would have required energy I didn't have, and honesty would have required trust that you never offered. George Reynolds looked at his daughter like she was a stranger. You're saying you're important? That you've been important this whole time? What I'm saying is that importance is subjective. My work saved lives, it prevented wars, it shaped policy. But in this family, the only thing that matters is whether people can see your success, whether it comes with the right kind of job title and salary and social status. I had all of those things, but they were classified. So to you, I had nothing. The silence stretched. 35 years of misunderstanding and disappointment and casual dismissal crystallizing into a moment of reckoning that nobody had wanted, but that had become inevitable the moment I'd taken that first conference call during Amanda's ceremony. General Blackwell's voice broke through. I think perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more private. This is still a wedding reception, and there are 300 guests inside who don't need to witness a family crisis. But Amanda wasn't done. No, I want to understand this. You're telling me that all those times you missed things, all those holidays you skipped, all those years you were too busy to be part of this family, that was all because of your important secret job? Some of it, yes. And the rest? The question hung there, demanding honesty I wasn't sure I could afford to give. But I'd already crossed too many lines tonight. One more wouldn't matter. The rest was because being with you hurt. Every family dinner was a reminder that you saw me as a failure. Every holiday was a performance where I had to pretend my life was less than it was, because admitting the truth would require explaining things I couldn't explain. After a while, it was easier to just not come, easier to be absent than present and invisible. My mother made a sound like she'd been struck. Catherine, we love you. We've always loved you. I know you love me, Mom, but love isn't the same as respect. You love me despite thinking I'm a disappointment. You love me while apologizing for me. You love me without ever actually seeing me. The truth of it settled over the terrace like fallout. Nobody knew how to respond, because what could you say to 3 decades of accumulated hurt finally spoken aloud? Sarah stepped forward. For what it's worth, Mrs. Reynolds, your daughter is one of the finest officers I've ever known. She taught me that real strength isn't about being loud or visible. It's about doing the work that matters even when no one will ever know you did it. She's lived that principle for 35 years. That takes a kind of courage most people will never understand. Catherine, my father's voice, rough with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Because you didn't ask, Dad. Not once in 35 years did you ask what I actually did. You assumed it was boring database work and that was enough. When I tried to talk about my career, vaguely, without violating classification, you changed the subject. You were more interested in Amanda's marketing campaigns than in anything I might be doing. That's not fair, Amanda interjected. My work is visible, understandable. What you're describing it's secret. How were we supposed to be interested in things you couldn't even explain? You could have trusted that I was doing something meaningful. You could have respected the silence instead of interpreting it as failure. You could have given me the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming the worst. The words kept coming, decades of repressed frustration and hurt finally finding voice. I told them about the years of missed holidays because I was deployed to places I couldn't name. About the therapy I'd needed after Yemen that I'd had to explain as stress from work transition. About the Navy Cross ceremony that only a handful of people with proper clearances had attended. About the countless nights I'd sat alone in my Arlington condo, wondering if the sacrifice was worth it. If protecting people who didn't even know they needed protection was a fair trade for having a family who actually saw me. My mother started crying, real tears, not the delicate dabbing she did during emotional moments to preserve her makeup. We've failed you. As parents, we've failed you completely. You did what you thought was right. You measured success by the only standards you knew. It's not your fault that my work existed in a world you couldn't access. But we could have asked, my father said quietly. We could have been curious about why you were so devoted to work we didn't understand. We could have trusted that our daughter was capable of more than we gave her credit for. Amanda sank down onto one of the terrace chairs, her elaborate wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. I don't know how to process this. My whole life I've been the successful one, the one who made Mom and Dad proud, the one who did everything right while you… She stopped, unable to finish. While I did everything wrong, I completed. Except I didn't. I just did everything privately. And you took that privacy as confirmation of your superiority. I never thought… Amanda's voice broke. God, I've been so cruel to you. The things I said today about you not mattering, about you being nothing… You believed what you were taught to believe. I had 35 years to correct the record. I chose not to. General Blackwell checked his watch. It's nearly 10. The reception is still going on. You need to make a decision about how to proceed. This can either be the dramatic revelation that overshadows the wedding, or you can table this conversation for later and let Amanda have her evening. He was right, of course. We'd already done enough damage. But something about the weight of accumulated silence being finally broken made me reluctant to seal it back up, even temporarily. Kat, Amanda looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I need to know. Do you hate me? The question was so unexpected it took me a moment to process. No, I've never hated you. But you must resent me all those years of me getting credit and attention while you were actually doing important things and getting nothing. I resented the situation. I resented the silence. But you? You're my sister. You're annoying and self-absorbed, and you've spent our entire lives treating me like I'm fundamentally less than you. But I don't hate you. I'm tired, Amanda. I'm tired of being invisible in my own family. She stood, navigated the minefield of her dress, and crossed to where I stood. For a moment, we just looked at each other, Two women who'd grown up in the same house but lived completely different lives, connected by DNA and history, but separated by everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For today, for everything. I should have been a better sister." We both should have been better. The hug was awkward, my stiff posture meeting her elaborate dress in a collision of fabric and repressed emotion. But it was genuine, and that counted for something. The reception continued. We'd been gone for nearly an hour, and when we returned to the ballroom, people stared but had the grace not to ask direct questions. Amanda and Thomas took to the floor for another dance, and gradually the party reasserted itself through sheer momentum of celebration and alcohol. I found a quiet corner and checked my encrypted phone one last time. All clear. Chinese vessels withdrawn. Crisis resolved. Another day, another disaster averted through careful analysis and measured response. The kind of work that mattered enormously in the moment and disappeared completely into classified files once it was done. Sarah found me as the evening wound down. "Commander, that was the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed. You just exploded 35 years of secrets in front of your entire family." I didn't mean to. I couldn't articulate what had happened. Why the careful control I'd maintained for decades had suddenly failed. I got tired of carrying it. Good, because that kind of silence was destroying you. Maybe it was. Or maybe it had destroyed me long ago, and I'd been functioning on autopilot, too committed to the performance to notice I'd become hollow inside. The reception ended at midnight. Guests filtered out to cars and hotels, exhausted from a day of celebration and drama. Amanda hugged me goodbye, holding on just a beat longer than necessary, and whispered that we'd talk soon. Really talk. Not just the surface conversations we'd maintained for years. I rode the elevator up to my suite alone, grateful for the silence. The cousins I was sharing with had decided to stay somewhere else for the night, giving me privacy I desperately needed. I changed out of the bridesmaid dress and into sweatpants and a t-shirt from my old unit, and sat on the bed staring at nothing in particular. My encrypted phone buzzed one last time. Text from a number I didn't have stored. "Commander Reynolds, this is William Blackwell. I owe you an apology. I pushed you to reveal yourself tonight because I thought it was necessary. I didn't consider the full cost. If you need anything, advice, support, or just someone to talk to who understands the burden of classified service, please reach out. You've carried this alone long enough." I set the phone down and walked to the window. Denver glowed below, oblivious and unconcerned with the small human dramas playing out in hotel rooms and hearts. Somewhere out there, analysts were monitoring threats I'd helped them understand. Officers were implementing protocols I designed. The machinery of national security ground on, impersonal and relentless. And I was no longer part of it, except when crisis demanded my expertise. I'd retired to reclaim my life, to figure out who Catherine Reynolds was when she wasn't Commander Reynolds. But tonight had proven I still didn't know the answer to that question. What I did know was that silence had been my strength for so long. I'd forgotten how to use my voice. And now that I'd found it again, screaming truths on a hotel terrace while my sister's wedding reception played out oblivious inside, I had no idea what to do with it. The city offered no answers. The mountains stood dark and impassive, and I sat in an expensive hotel suite, wondering if breaking the silence had liberated me, or simply revealed how thoroughly I'd lost myself inside it. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of bright Colorado sunshine that felt personally offensive given the emotional wreckage of the previous night. I woke at 6:30 out of military habit, disoriented for the 3 seconds it took to remember where I was and what had exploded. The hotel suite was silent except for the whisper of heating vents, and for a moment I considered staying in bed indefinitely, avoiding the inevitable conversations that awaited. My encrypted phone showed 2 missed calls from the Pentagon and 1 text from Sarah. "Commander, my grandfather wants to have breakfast with you and your family. 9 a.m. at the hotel restaurant. He says it's important. Please come." The last thing I wanted was to perform family reconciliation in front of witnesses. But General Blackwell wasn't someone you ignored when he made requests. I texted back confirmation and forced myself into the shower, letting scalding water strip away the residue of last night's confrontation. The face in the mirror looked older than 58. Lines around my eyes had deepened overnight, Or maybe I was just seeing them clearly for the first time without the protective distance of emotional numbness. I'd spent 35 years perfecting the ability to compartmentalize, to separate Catherine, the person, from Commander Reynolds, the officer. But last night had shattered those compartments, and now I was left holding all the pieces without a blueprint for reassembly. I dressed in jeans and a simple navy sweater, civilian clothes that felt like costume after decades of either uniforms or the carefully neutral attire I'd adopted to fade into backgrounds. My regular phone showed 17 text messages from family members, but I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. Some conversations required face-to-face courage that hadn't regenerated overnight. The hotel restaurant occupied the ground floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. Sunday morning meant families with children creating cheerful chaos, business people working through emails over coffee, tourists planning their day in the mountains, normal people living normal lives, unburdened by classified secrets or family estrangements that had festered for decades. My parents sat at a corner table with General Blackwell, the three of them looking like they'd already been deep in conversation before I arrived. My father's expression was unreadable. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and the general looked like he'd slept perfectly well despite spending his son's wedding reception mediating someone else's family crisis. Catherine, my mother, stood as I approached, and for a terrible moment, I thought she might hug me in public. Instead, she gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please sit. We've been talking with General Blackwell about everything." I took the seat, nodded to the general, and focused on the menu because looking at my parents felt too raw. A server appeared immediately, and I ordered coffee and nothing else because the thought of food made my stomach clench. General Blackwell waited until the server left before speaking. "Commander Reynolds, I took the liberty of sharing some context with your parents about the nature of classified service. Not specific operations, those remain protected, but the general framework of what your work entailed and why silence was required rather than chosen." "You didn't have to do that, sir." I disagreed. Your parents deserve to understand that your silence came from legal obligation, not personal rejection. The details of your career may be classified, but the fact that you served with distinction at the highest levels of intelligence work is a matter of public record for anyone who knows where to look. My father cleared his throat. A sound I'd learned meant he was uncomfortable, but determined to speak anyway. "Margaret, the general showed us your service record, the unclassified parts at least. I had no idea. We had no idea the extent of your deployments, your commendations, your—" He stopped, struggling. "You were awarded the Navy Cross. That's the second highest decoration for valor. And we didn't know. We should have known." "You couldn't have known, Dad. That ceremony was attended by 8 people with proper clearances. The citation is classified. Even my ex-husband didn't know about it until after the divorce, when his lawyer tried to use it in settlement negotiations." My mother made a small wounded sound. "Marcus knew? Before us?" "His lawyer found out through military records during discovery." Marcus was furious that I'd never told him, which contributed to his argument that I was fundamentally incapable of intimacy or trust. He wasn't entirely wrong. The coffee arrived, and I wrapped both hands around the cup like it might anchor me to something solid. The restaurant noise continued around us. Laughter from a nearby table, a child dropping silverware, the espresso machine hissing. Normal sounds from a normal world I'd never quite belonged to. General Blackwell leaned forward. "I want to be clear about something. The burden of classified service falls disproportionately on the people carrying those secrets. Catherine spent 35 years unable to share victories, unable to process trauma with family support, unable to receive recognition from the people whose opinions mattered most. That kind of isolation takes a psychological toll that civilians rarely understand." "We should have understood anyway," my mother whispered. "We should have trusted that our daughter was doing something meaningful, even if she couldn't explain it. Instead, Her voice broke. "We made you feel small. We made you feel worthless. And you just absorbed it all because you thought that's what duty required." "It's not about blame, Mom. You worked within the only framework you had. Success to you meant visible achievement, social recognition, the kind of accomplishments you could discuss at dinner parties. My work existed outside that framework entirely." "That's not an excuse for 35 years of dismissiveness," my father interjected. his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. The general helped me understand something last night. He said that the people who serve in silence often get overlooked by the very people they're protecting, that it's a particular kind of sacrifice, choosing to be invisible so others can remain safe. And we didn't just overlook you, Margaret, we actively diminished you. The words landed with more impact than he probably intended. George Reynolds was not given to emotional speeches or self-reflection, and hearing him articulate the depth of their failure suggested that last night's explosion had fractured something in him too. "I need to tell you something," my mother said, gripping her coffee cup so tightly I worried it might shatter, "about why I always compared you to Amanda, why I always seemed disappointed in your choices. It's not an excuse, but it's context you deserve." She paused, gathering herself, and I realized this was difficult for her in ways I'd never considered. Linda Reynolds had built her identity around being the perfect mother who raised successful daughters, and admitting failure in that role required dismantling that entire self-concept. When you enlisted, I was terrified. Not just worried, actually terrified. This was 1989, and the Cold War was ending but not over. Women in combat roles were still controversial. And I kept thinking about everything that could happen to you in ways I never worried about Amanda going to business school. So I convinced myself that you'd made a mistake, that if I could just show you how much better civilian life could be, how much happier and safer and more normal, you'd eventually come back to the path I'd envisioned for you. She looked directly at me for the first time since I'd sat down. But you never did come back. You kept advancing, kept deploying, kept choosing the military over family events. And instead of being proud that you'd found your calling, I took it as personal rejection. I thought you were choosing danger and distance because you didn't value what I valued: home, family, stability. So I stopped trying to understand your choices and started criticizing them instead. I decided that if you were going to reject my vision for your life, then your vision must be flawed. The honesty was brutal and unexpected. Part of me wanted to accept this explanation as sufficient closure, to move forward without dwelling on the damage done. But another part, the part that had finally learned to use its voice last night, couldn't let it be that simple. "Mom, I appreciate you explaining this, but understanding why you diminished me doesn't erase the fact that you did it consistently for 35 years. Every holiday, every phone call, every family gathering, you found ways to make me feel less than Amanda. And the worst part is that I internalized it. I started believing that my work only mattered because it was classified, that if people could see what I actually did, they'd still find it wanting somehow." "That's not true," General Blackwell interjected. "Your work stands on its own merits regardless of classification. The assessments you've written have shaped policy decisions that affected millions of lives. The intelligence you've provided has prevented conflicts that would have cost thousands of casualties. You've served with distinction in one of the most challenging fields the military offers. Classification doesn't make that more impressive. It just makes it invisible to people without clearance." My father absorbed this silently, his accountant's mind probably trying to calculate the value of work that couldn't be quantified in traditional metrics. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion I'd rarely heard from him. "I failed you as a father. Not just by not understanding your work, but by not insisting on understanding it. When you tried to talk about your career, and I changed the subject, that wasn't ignorance. That was willful disengagement. I told myself that if it mattered, you'd explain it better. But the truth is, I found it easier to focus on Amanda's achievements because they made sense to me. Marketing campaigns, client presentations, promotions I could understand. Those fit into my worldview. Strategic intelligence analysis? That was foreign and uncomfortable, so I dismissed it." He reached across the table, his hand shaking slightly. "Can you forgive us? Not immediately, not without time and work to rebuild trust, but eventually?" The question hung there, loaded with 3 decades of accumulated hurt that wouldn't vanish with a single conversation. I looked at my parents, elderly now, their faces lined with age and fresh understanding of failure, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of willingness to forgive if they proved capable of change. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. What you're asking for is earned, not granted. You spent 35 years building a narrative about who I was. Dismantling that narrative will take time and consistent effort. You'll have to choose to see me differently every single day, even when it's uncomfortable or challenges your assumptions. Can you do that? My mother nodded, tears spilling freely now. Yes, however long it takes, whatever work it requires. Yes. Amanda's arrival interrupted the moment. She appeared in the restaurant entrance wearing yesterday's makeup and what looked like Thomas's sweatshirt over her own clothes, clearly having come directly from wherever she'd spent the night processing her own emotional devastation. She spotted our table and crossed the restaurant with determined steps. "I'm crashing this breakfast," she announced, pulling up a chair from a nearby table. "Because apparently we're doing the uncomfortable family reckoning thing and I need to participate." She looked at me with eyes that were bloodshot but clear. "Kat, I spent all night thinking about everything you said on the terrace, about how I treated you, about the assumptions I made, about the cruelty I didn't even recognize as cruelty because I thought it was just truth-telling." "Amanda, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Because if I don't say this now, I'll talk myself out of it. I've been jealous of you our entire lives, not because you were successful. I didn't know you were successful, but because you had purpose. You always knew what you were fighting for, what mattered to you, what you were willing to sacrifice for. And I've built my entire career selling things people don't need, convincing them that the right shade of lipstick or the right brand of car will make them happy. I've always known it was bullshit, but it was comfortable bullshit that came with good money and social approval." She took a shaky breath. "When you walked out of my ceremony yesterday to take that call, I was furious. But not really because you ruined my perfect moment. I was furious because even on my wedding day, the day that was supposed to be entirely about me, you had something more important to do, and that made me feel small and insignificant in ways I didn't know how to process." "You're not insignificant, Amanda. Your work has value. Marketing isn't my calling, but that doesn't make it worthless." "Maybe, but I've spent so much energy competing with you, trying to prove I was the successful sister, that I never stopped to wonder if the competition was even real. You weren't competing with me. You were just living your life and doing your work. And I made it all about me because—" She stopped, vulnerability cracking through her usual polished presentation. "Because if I wasn't the successful one, the pretty one, the one who did everything right, then who was I?" General Blackwell stood. "I'm going to give you all some privacy for this conversation. Catherine, I'll be in the lobby if you need anything. Your family needs time to work through this without an audience." He left, and the four of us sat in silence that felt different from the comfortable silence of people who understood each other. This was the loaded quiet of people reassessing everything they'd believed, finding fault lines where they'd thought there was solid ground. My phone vibrated. I glanced down. Pentagon calling. Again. This would be the third attempt since last night, and ignoring it much longer would trigger protocols I'd prefer to avoid. "I need to take this. It's work." The flash of old resentment crossed Amanda's face. Another moment where work interrupted family. But she nodded. "Of course. We'll be here." I stepped outside into Denver's crisp October morning and answered. "Reynolds." "Commander, this is Secretary Martinez. I apologize for calling on a Sunday, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." My stomach dropped. "Ma'am, I'm at a family event. Can this wait until—" "It can't. We need you in Washington by tomorrow morning. The president wants to meet with you personally to discuss the Taiwan situation and your role in de-escalating it. More importantly, we'd like to offer you a position, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. It's the highest civilian intelligence position available, and you're the most qualified candidate we've seen in a decade." The words processed slowly, each one carrying weight that required careful examination. This was the culmination of 35 years of work, the recognition, the power, the ability to shape policy at the highest levels. Everything I'd sacrificed for, trained for, built toward. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but I need time to consider this." "Time is something we don't have much of, Commander. China is escalating their posture, Russia is probing boundaries in Eastern Europe, and we need your strategic mind helping us navigate an increasingly complex threat environment. I understand you retired to step away from operational stress, but this position offers influence without the daily crisis management. You'd be shaping long-term strategy, not responding to immediate threats." Through the restaurant windows, I could see my family sitting at the table. My mother was crying again. My father was talking with animated hand gestures I'd never seen from him before, and Amanda was leaning forward, listening with an intensity she usually reserved for client presentations. They were trying, actually trying to understand, to bridge the gap, to be the family I'd needed them to be for 35 years. Secretary Martinez, I appreciate the offer more than I can express, but I need 48 hours to think about this. I've spent my entire adult life choosing duty over personal relationships, and I'm not sure that's a choice I want to keep making. The silence on the line suggested this wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance she'd expected. Commander, opportunities like this don't come twice. If you turn this down, we'll offer it to someone else, someone less qualified, someone whose analysis isn't as sharp, someone who might make mistakes that cost lives. Is that something you're willing to live with? The manipulation was subtle but effective. She'd identified the pressure point, my sense of responsibility for outcomes I could influence. If I said no and the next person made catastrophic errors, could I live with knowing I could have prevented it? I understand the stakes, ma'am, but I also understand that I've been running from personal relationships for 3 decades, hiding behind classification and duty as excuses for not doing the harder work of being present with people I love. This decision isn't just about the job. It's about who I want to be when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old, and I need time to figure that out. 48 hours, then I need an answer. The call ended. I stood on the sidewalk watching Denver come to life around me. Joggers heading toward the mountains, families loading into cars for church, a street musician setting up his guitar case for donations. Normal life, the kind I'd observed from a distance but never quite participated in. When I returned to the table, 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me with identical expressions of concern. My mother spoke first. Was that about the crisis yesterday? Are you being called back? It was the Secretary of Defense. She's offering me a position at the Pentagon, Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence. I paused, trying to find words that conveyed the magnitude. It's the highest civilian intelligence position in the government. It's everything I've worked toward. Amanda's face fell. So you're leaving again. Just when we're finally starting to understand each other, you're going back to the work that's always been more important than us. I haven't decided anything yet. But you will, she said, and there was no accusation in her voice, just tired resignation. Because that's who you are, the person who chooses the important work over the messy personal stuff. And I get it now, I really do. Someone has to do that work. I'm just sad that someone always has to be you. My father reached across the table, his hand finding mine. Margaret, what do you want? Not what you think you should do. Not what duty requires, not what we need from you. What do you actually want for your life? The question hit like physical impact because I genuinely didn't know the answer. I'd spent so long being Commander Reynolds that Catherine had become a secondary identity, something I inhabited during downtime but never fully developed. My wants had been sublimated to needs: national security needs, operational needs, strategic needs. Personal desire had seemed selfish when weighed against collective safety. I don't know, I admitted. I've never really asked myself that question. I knew what I was good at, what I was needed for, what I could contribute, but what I want, I have no idea. My mother squeezed my other hand. Then maybe that's your answer right there. Maybe you need time to figure out who you are when you're not saving the world. Maybe you need to learn what brings you joy instead of just satisfaction from duty well done. The words resonated in ways I hadn't expected from Linda Reynolds, who'd spent 60 years defining herself through traditional success metrics. But perhaps last night's explosion had fractured her certainties too, forced her to question what actually mattered when you stripped away social performance and conventional achievement. The secretary said I have 48 hours to decide, but honestly, I think I've already made my choice. I'm just scared to admit it because it feels like abandoning everything I've built my identity around. What's your choice? Amanda asked, her voice careful. To say no, to step away from the work I've done for 35 years and figure out what comes next without a mission brief or operational orders. To be terrifyingly, completely uncertain about my purpose for the first time since I was 22 years old. The silence that followed felt fragile, like we were all holding our breath, waiting to see if this moment of honesty could survive contact with reality. Then my father smiled, a real smile, not the polite expression he usually wore during family functions. That's the bravest thing I've heard you say. Brave not because you're walking into danger, but because you're walking into uncertainty without a plan. That takes a different kind of courage than military service. We stayed at that table for 3 more hours, ordering breakfast that went mostly uneaten, while we talked through decades of missed connections and misunderstandings. The conversation was messy, sometimes circular, occasionally painful as old wounds reopened before they could properly heal. But it was real, in ways our family interactions had never been before. No performance, no carefully maintained image, just flawed people trying to understand each other across chasms they'd spent years digging. Amanda told me about her own struggles with feeling inadequate despite external success, about therapy she'd started after realizing her perfectionism was becoming pathological. My mother talked about her mother, my grandmother Evelyn, and how she'd never understood why Evelyn respected my choice to enlist until now, when she could see it from a different angle. My father admitted that he'd been proud of me all along, but hadn't known how to express it because he couldn't understand what I was doing. And male socialization had taught him that confusion should be masked as dismissal rather than admitted as limitation. Around noon, Sarah appeared at the restaurant entrance looking for us. "Commander Reynolds, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my grandfather wanted me to check if you're okay. He said the Pentagon called and he's worried about you." "I'm fine, Lieutenant. Tell him thank you for his concern and thank him for giving my family context last night. He didn't have to do that." Sarah hesitated, then sat down in the chair General Blackwell had vacated hours earlier. "Ma'am, can I say something that might be overstepping? You've seen me in a bridesmaid dress briefing the Secretary of Defense. I think we're past normal boundaries." "Fair point. Here's what I want to say. You taught me that leadership isn't about rank or authority. It's about knowing when to step forward and when to step back. You've spent 35 years stepping forward. Maybe it's time to step back and let someone else carry the weight for a while. The intelligence community is full of brilliant analysts who can do the work. But you only get one family, and they're right here trying to rebuild something that was broken. That seems like it might be more important right now." The wisdom from a 28-year-old officer landed with surprising impact. Sarah was right. The work would continue without me. Someone else would take that Pentagon position, maybe make different analytical calls, but probably arrive at similar conclusions. The intelligence machinery was vast and redundant by design. I was good at what I did, maybe exceptional, but I wasn't irreplaceable. My family, though, that was finite. My parents were in their 80s. Amanda and I had wasted decades on rivalry that served no one. These relationships couldn't be put on hold indefinitely, while I served one more year, managed one more crisis, shaped one more policy. There would always be one more thing demanding my attention, one more situation where my expertise could make a difference, one more reason to defer personal life in service of professional duty. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That's exactly what I needed to hear." Sarah stood, nodded to my family, and left us to continue the painful, necessary work of reconstructing connections that had atrophied from neglect and misunderstanding. By the time we left the restaurant, Denver's afternoon had arrived in full force. Families in the park across the street, couples walking dogs, the mountains visible in the distance promising wilderness and perspective. I walked with my family to the hotel lobby, and we stood there awkwardly trying to figure out how to say goodbye after a weekend that had demolished and potentially rebuilt everything we thought we knew about each other. "Will you come to Thanksgiving?" my mother asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Really come, not just make an appearance and check your phone every 15 minutes?" "Yes, I'll really be there. No encrypted phones, no emergency briefings, just family. And can we—" Amanda stopped, struggling with vulnerability that didn't come naturally to her. "Can we maybe talk between now and then, like actual conversations where we're honest with each other instead of just performing our roles?" "I'd like that." We hugged goodbye, real hugs, not the brief obligatory embraces we'd exchanged for years. My father held on longest, his arms tight around me in a way they hadn't been since I was a child. "I'm proud of you, Margaret. I should have said that 35 years ago, and I should have kept saying it every day since. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it." The words cracked something inside me that I thought was safely sealed, and I felt tears threatening for the first time since the divorce. I'd cried about Marcus, about the failure of my marriage, about the loss of the future we'd planned. But I hadn't cried about my family's dismissal because that required acknowledging how much it hurt. And I'd been too busy compartmentalizing to let myself feel the full weight of that particular wound. Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know. The flight back to Washington departed at 6 that evening. I spent the afternoon in my hotel room making the call I'd been avoiding since Secretary Martinez's offer. She answered on the second ring. Commander Reynolds, have you made a decision? Yes, ma'am. I'm declining the position with gratitude and respect, but I'm declining. Silence. Then, may I ask why? And please be honest. I need to understand what we're losing by losing you. You're not losing me entirely, ma'am. I'm happy to consult on specific situations where my expertise is needed. But the full-time position, the daily grind of policy and politics and managing bureaucracy, I can't do it. I've spent 35 years sacrificing personal relationships for professional duty, and I've recently discovered I don't actually know who I am outside of my work. I need time to figure that out before I commit to something that would consume the next decade of my life. You're choosing family over service. The statement carried no judgment, just observation. I'm choosing to believe that I've already given enough, that someone else can carry this particular weight, that I don't have to be the one who steps forward every single time there's a crisis. You know the problems won't stop just because you're not there to solve them. I do know that, ma'am. And I've made peace with it. The intelligence community has thousands of talented people. You'll find someone good for that position. Maybe not as good as me. I allowed myself a moment of honest assessment rather than false modesty. But good enough. And right now, good enough is acceptable. I disagree. But I respect your decision. The offer remains open for 6 months if you change your mind. After that, we'll move forward with other candidates. Thank you, ma'am. That's generous. Catherine, her use of my first name caught me off guard. Take care of yourself. The work will always be here if you need it, but families don't wait. The call ended. I sat in the hotel room feeling simultaneously lighter and more terrified than I'd felt in decades. I'd just turned down the culmination of my career, the validation I'd worked toward, the recognition that would have finally proven to everyone, including myself, that I mattered. But maybe that was the point. Maybe proving I mattered was less important than figuring out what actually brought meaning to my life, beyond metrics of professional achievement and national security impact. My regular phone rang, Amanda's name on the screen. Hey, I answered, still getting used to the idea that we might actually talk regularly now. Kat, I just wanted to say, Thomas and I are staying in Denver an extra day, and I was wondering if maybe you could stay too. We could have dinner tonight, just the two of us. No parents, no wedding stress, just sisters trying to figure out who we actually are to each other. The invitation was tentative, vulnerable, in ways Amanda usually avoided. Part of me wanted to refuse. I had work to wrap up in Arlington, consulting projects to address, the comfortable solitude of my condo waiting. But that was the old pattern, the one where I prioritized anything over uncomfortable personal connection. I'll change my flight. Where do you want to meet? The relief in her voice was audible. There's this Italian place near the hotel. Nothing fancy, just good food and wine. 7 o'clock? I'll be there. The dinner was everything family dinners had never been. Honest, messy, occasionally painful, as we worked through specific memories of hurt and misunderstanding. Amanda talked about growing up feeling like she had to be perfect because I'd already claimed the role of disappointing daughter. I talked about the isolation of keeping secrets, the corrosive effect of classified work on authentic relationships, the way I'd internalized their dismissal until I believed I deserved it. We cried. We laughed at absurdities we'd never found funny before. We made plans for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and regular phone calls that might actually happen if we both committed to trying. Around 11, walking back to the hotel through downtown Denver's quiet Sunday night streets, Amanda said something that shifted everything into new focus. You know what I realized today? I spent 30 years competing with you for Mom and Dad's approval, but you were never competing with me. You were just trying to do good work and survive the isolation of keeping secrets. And I made it all about me. My insecurity, my need for validation, my fear that if you were secretly impressive, then I was secretly mediocre. But that was never the actual dynamic. That was just the story I told myself to justify treating you like you didn't matter. We both made mistakes, Amanda. I could have tried harder to stay connected despite the classification. I could have found ways to be present that didn't require explaining my work. I chose the easier path, letting you believe the worst because arguing required energy I didn't have. Maybe, but I was cruel, and cruelty is always a choice. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I know, and I forgive you. Not perfectly, not without scars, but genuinely. We're sisters. We get to keep trying to do better. 8 months later, I stood in my new home, a modest ranch house in rural Virginia, 20 minutes from Arlington, but feeling like a different world. The garden I'd planted in spring was producing tomatoes and peppers, and I'd discovered I had a talent for growing things when I actually had time to pay attention. My condo had sold quickly to a young couple expecting their first child, and I'd used the proceeds to buy this place outright. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, an office where I did occasional consulting work, and a porch where I drank coffee every morning watching the sun rise over farmland that stretched to the horizon. The consulting work came sporadically, 3 or 4 projects a month, where someone at the Pentagon or State Department needed analysis on specific situations. Enough to keep my mind sharp and my security clearance active, not enough to consume my life. The rest of my time I spent learning who Catherine Reynolds was when she wasn't Commander Reynolds. I joined a book club, took painting classes at a local community center, where I was objectively terrible but enjoyed the process anyway. Started running trails in the nearby state park, not for fitness, but for the meditative quality of moving through woods where the only strategic considerations were whether to take the steep path or the long route around. My phone rang. Amanda's weekly call, scheduled for Thursday mornings when she had time between meetings. Hey Kat, how's the hermit life treating you? It's not hermit life if I'm actively participating in community activities. That's just country living. Fair point. So, I wanted to run something by you. Thomas and I are thinking about buying a cabin in the mountains, somewhere we can go for weekends to disconnect from work. And I was wondering if maybe you'd want to come with us to look at properties? Like actually come and participate in the decision, not just politely decline from a distance? The invitation was casual but carried weight. Amanda actively including me in her life, treating my opinion as valuable, creating space for ongoing connection rather than obligatory holiday appearances. I'd love that. When are you thinking? Next month? We could make a weekend of it. Maybe convince mom and dad to come too. Turn it into a family thing. Family thing. The phrase that used to trigger anxiety now just felt like possibility. Imperfect people trying to build something better than what they'd had before. A car pulled into my driveway. Sarah Blackwell climbed out wearing civilian clothes, her short dark hair longer than it had been at the wedding. She'd been promoted to lieutenant commander since Denver, and was stationed at Pentagon doing exactly the kind of strategic work I'd stepped away from. Amanda, I have to go. Sarah just arrived for lunch. Sarah Blackwell, you two are friends now? Something like that. She stops by once a month to update me on Pacific theater developments and eat my cooking. It's nice having someone who understands that world, but doesn't need me to be back in it full time. We said goodbye, and I headed to the porch where Sarah was already settling into one of the rocking chairs I'd bought at an estate sale. Commander, you look disgustingly peaceful. Country life agrees with you. I'm not a commander anymore, Sarah. Just Catherine. And yes, it does agree with me. How are things at the Pentagon? She launched into an update on Chinese naval movements, Russian provocations in the Baltics, the latest iteration of policy debates I'd once been central to. I listened with interest, but without the urgent need to insert myself into problem solving. These were important issues, but they were no longer my issues. Not in the daily operational sense, anyway. You know what the analysts say? Sarah remarked around a mouthful of the pasta salad I'd made from garden vegetables. They say your retirement created a vacuum that 3 people are trying to fill. Your strategic assessment methodology has been codified into training programs. You changed the whole approach to intelligence analysis, and now everyone's trying to figure out how to maintain that standard without you there driving it. That's how it should work. Systems shouldn't depend on individuals. If my methodology was good, it should outlive my direct participation. Still, don't you miss it. The adrenaline of crisis management, the satisfaction of knowing your analysis just prevented catastrophic miscalculation? The honest answer was yes and no. I missed the sense of purpose, the clarity of mission, the intellectual challenge of parsing complex patterns into actionable intelligence. But I didn't miss the isolation, the constant compartmentalization, the way duty had consumed every other aspect of my life, until nothing else remained. I miss parts of it, but I don't miss who I became while doing it. Someone so focused on professional competence that I forgot how to be human in any other context. This, I gestured at the garden, the house, the peaceful afternoon with a friend who understood my past, but didn't need me to live there permanently. This is me figuring out what human looks like when it's not defined by crisis. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted. Commander, Catherine, sorry, there's a developing situation in the Taiwan Strait. They're asking if you're available for consultation. The familiar pull toward duty started its gravitational tug. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to dive back into the work I was exceptionally good at, to prove I was still relevant and necessary. But another part, the part I'd been carefully cultivating over 8 months, recognized that saying yes would mean sliding back into patterns I'd worked hard to break. Tell them I'm not available today. If it's still critical tomorrow, they can send me encrypted files and I'll review them overnight. But I'm not dropping everything to take a call on a Thursday afternoon when I have a friend visiting and tomatoes to harvest. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You're really serious about this boundaries thing. Deadly serious. The work will always be there, Sarah. There will always be another crisis, another situation where my expertise could help, another reason to defer personal life for professional duty. But if I don't draw lines now, I'll wake up at 75 having spent my entire life responding to other people's emergencies while never building anything that's actually mine. She nodded slowly. That's a lesson I should probably learn before I'm 58 and divorced with no relationships outside of work. Smart woman. We spent the afternoon in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. Her dating life, my attempts at painting, the book club's current selection that we both found pretentious but were reading anyway. Normal conversation between friends, the kind I'd observed other people having for decades, but never quite managed myself because I was always half present, half monitoring for threats. That evening, after Sarah left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset over Virginia farmland. My encrypted phone sat on the table beside me, silent for once. The regular phone showed a text from my mother. Looking forward to Thanksgiving. Dad wants to know if you need anything for the guest room. I was actually going home for Thanksgiving, not performing an obligatory appearance, but genuinely going because I wanted to be there. Wanted to continue the hard work of rebuilding connections that had atrophied from decades of neglect. Another text appeared. General Blackwell, whose number I'd saved after Denver. Commander Reynolds, heard you turned down a consultation request today. Good for you. Setting boundaries with the work is harder than fighting wars. You've earned the right to choose peace. William Blackwell. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Somewhere, intelligence analysts were tracking threats I'd helped them understand. Officers were implementing protocols I'd designed. The machinery of national security ground on, impersonal and relentless, managing perfectly well without my daily participation. And I sat in a rocking chair on a porch I owned, drinking wine from my own vineyard, watching the first stars appear in a sky unpolluted by city lights. This was what I'd been protecting all along, not abstract concepts of freedom or security, but moments exactly like this one. The quiet peace of ordinary leaf, available to people who'd never know how close they'd come to losing it. Real power, I'd finally learned, wasn't measured in security clearances or policy influence or medals in velvet boxes. Real power was choosing what you protected and who you became in the process. It was setting boundaries that honored both duty and humanity. It was understanding that silence could be strength, but voice could be freedom. I'd spent 35 years being invisible so others could remain safe. Now I was learning to be visible in ways that mattered, to family who'd finally learned to see me, to friends who knew my history without needing me to perform it, to myself most importantly. The stars multiplied overhead, ancient light from distant suns reaching Earth after traveling for years through darkness. I'd traveled through my own darkness and emerged not unchanged but whole in ways I'd never been, while wearing the uniform or carrying the secrets. The work would call again. It always did. Crises would develop that would benefit from my expertise. But next time I'd answer on my terms, with boundaries intact and identity secured. I was Catherine Reynolds first now, and Commander Reynolds only when absolutely necessary. That felt like victory in ways no medal or commendation ever had.